What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Presleevables March of the Machine edition. Host Cedric Phillips at Cedric A. Phillips on all the things. Most Patrick Sullivan at Basic Mountain on Twitter. Patrick, we've done battles. We've done all the colors. We got one thing left to do.
All the colors.
Right.
The multicolors.
Yes. Of which this set has quite a few, and they're really interesting. I'm not a Vorthos, I'm not a big flavor person, but the story that this set is trying to tell of all of these essentially team-ups that are taking place, really cool.
And they present some interesting design challenges and opportunities. You don't want it to feel like just A and B slapped together, but you also want to see the through lines of the old versions and how they're represented here, and ideally in a way that makes the design a coherent song, even if you aren't familiar with the original characters.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to get right. It's especially hard when you're doing a bunch of them because
and they're doing a bunch.
They're doing a bunch of them. To be transparent, there's not a whole lot of them that are on my list of my favorite designs because they are just longer and a little bit more cumbersome than sort of my design sensibilities in general. But there is a cool suite of cards here, and I believe they're going to be extremely popular with players in general.
I think they are going to be extremely popular cards because on a base level, I think most of them are pretty powerful, but we're going to break it all down. I'm the power level guy. I'm doing my top 5 list as always for competitive and constructed play. Patrick is doing
my favorite designs from a game design perspective. Things that I think are cool executions, cards that I think will play particularly well or fun, cards that introduce kind of novel solutions to some common design pitfalls, things of that nature.
Now, before we do dive into these multicolored cards, I'm sure you're wondering, are they going to do any of the artifacts? There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and one of them is Sword of Once and Future. They just didn't really make our list or worth really doing anything.
Short list, so we're skipping it this time.
There you go. And then the lands, this is one of the few times where there's not a rare cycle of lands to get excited about, so there's nothing there as well. So our focus is on multicolored cards for today, our final episode of the Presleevables March of the Machine edition. And we're starting with this guy over here. Your first card is?
It is Elvish Vatkeeper.
1 black, green, 3 total mana for a 3/3 Phyrexian elf. When Elvish Vatkeeper enters the battlefield, incubate 2. All right, fair enough. You can pay 5 generic mana to transform target incubator token you control. Double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Okay, so normally you pay 2 to transform that token, but this thing lets you pay 5, and then basically transforms it into a normal one into a 4/4, but obviously it can scale.
Yeah, and I think this is just a very simple, clean design. I like cards that are basically, they work on their own, but if you're doing the thing, you're going to get more out of it. And this is a really great landing spot for this. Incubate 2 and then 5 to essentially turn it into a 4/4. You are getting some scaling there. You are getting more than, what you initially signed up for. But clearly doing this with incubate 4s and 5s is going to be a lot more powerful if you can set up the whole thing. So it's a nice way to give people a little bit of an ability to dip their toes in the water for the mechanic, and but also if you happen to build around it, this could be super appealing too.
All right, so that's number 5 for you. Number 5 for me is Drana and Linvala. So this one costs 1 B, so that's 4 total mana, 2 of which is white. It's a 3/4 Vampire Angel, makes a lot of sense given the characters that are involved, with flying and vigilance, again, makes a lot of sense. Activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. That calls back to 4-mana Linvala. And then Drana and Linvala has all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. So, why is this on my power level list? Okay, couple of reasons. Number 1, 4 mana, 3/4 flying vigilance. That's just pretty good as far as rate is concerned. Number 2, Vampire Angel creature type. Those are creature types that matter in constructed. All right. Activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Well, I played during a time Linvala was constructed legal, and that ability mattered. Mm-hmm. And shutting off all that stuff, we're talking about shutting off mana abilities from mana creatures, any activated abilities of other creatures, could be a myriad of things, obviously. They're all shut off until this gets killed. And then having the abilities of all other creatures your opponents control, okay, That might come up, it might not. It's really, really hard to say depending on what's going on in formats and stuff like that. Generally, creatures are kind of static and just like, hey, I've got like a static thing like Shieldred where there's no ability to activate. But sometimes it may come up. But at the end of the day, on a base level, good power, good toughness for the mana cost, good keywords in flying and vigilance, and then shutting off your opponent's stuff, that can come up.
It does feel a lot like in Linval insofar as if you're just playing a deck that kind of attacks and blocks, you can justify playing the card just on stats and keywords relative to mana cost.
Yeah.
And some percentage of your opponents are really going to struggle to play through this.
Yes. And I think it's pretty much that simple, but don't sell short those creature types with Vampire and Angel, because we've seen Vampire constructed decks and we've seen Angel-based constructed decks as well, and this could slot into either one of those. Number 4 for you.
Quintorius, Lore Master.
All right, 3, a red and a white. So 5 total mana for a 3/5 legendary Elephant Cleric. With Vigilance, okay. At the beginning of your end step, exile target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard. So that's basically instants and sorceries.
Yep.
Okay. Create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Okay. You can activate this thing for 1, a red and a white. You tap it and you sacrifice a spirit, which you are conveniently making with Quintorius. Choose target card exiled with Quintorius. You may cast that card this turn without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. All right, there's a lot going on with this Elephant Cleric.
Yeah, the short version is you play this, end of turn, you exile something, get a 3/2. Come back to your turn, if 3/2 is still around, or you have some other spirit somewhere, you can then just 0 mana play whatever the spell is that you exiled.
Sure.
Really fun. I really appreciate trying to tap into the red-white Strixhaven experience a little bit with this design.
Yep.
You know, it's red-white has such a, and really all the 2-color identities have such an association with Ravnica that it's very hard to do other 2-color sets and have those things land or resonate over time.
Yep.
You know, there's one set of Strixhaven versus how many Ravnica and Ravnica adjacent sets?
At least 3.
Right. So tapping into, there's elephants, there's spirits, there's like an archaeologist sort of vibe to it. I think that little nod there is a really nice thing to do for just making that world feel a little bit more rich and more alive. And it's also just a fun set of incentives. Like, it's not trivial to just dump an expensive spell into your graveyard and then have this and then untap and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a huge parlay. So even though it reads really aspirationally, like, oh wow, I could just recast anything, any mana cost, not gated.
Yeah.
The setting that up is a lot more complicated. And so I think that what you actually do with this card a lot of the time is just sort of play normal cards and play a normal game, even though it is pretty fancy and aspirational. Cool card.
I think it's a really, really cool card. I think this is a card that, again, I'm no Commander aficionado. I think it's probably going to shine over there. I think players are really going to really like that. And heck, it could even be a popular commander given that it is a legendary creature. Number 4 for me is the Botanical Brawler. Green and a white, so it's a 2-mana elemental warrior. It's a 0/0 with trample. But it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it, so it's effectively a 2-mana 2/2 with trample. And here it is. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on another permanent you control, if it's the first time +1/+1 counters have been put on that permanent this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Botanical Brawler. So we talked about a little bit in the green episode and other previous episodes. Look, they're clearly dialing up the counters in this set. They're doing some hardened scales, Ozolith type of things, and this is a creature for that sort of strategy. Again, entering the battlefield as a 2-mana 2/2 trampler. You're going to want to put a lot of counters on this in some form or fashion because it does have trample, so it can push through a lot of damage. And then whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on another permanent, so not this one, if it's the first time +1/+1 counters have been put on that permanent, this guy gets a little bonus too.
Yeah. It seems like if you're doing the thing with +1/+1 counters, this would be a foundational card you would build around.
Yeah, and it's pretty straightforward. It's just the 2-drop that goes into this style of deck. No muss, no fuss. If this is a deck, it's almost certainly going to play 4 copies of this.
Right.
All right, number 3 for you.
Kogla and Yadaro.
All right, I love this card.
Me too.
You're going to see this from me a little bit later in the show. 2 RRGG. So this is a 6-mana, 7/7 legendary ape dinosaur turtle. So 3 creature types. When this thing enters the battlefield, you get to choose one. It gains trample and haste until end of turn, or it fights target creature you don't control. But you also have the opportunity to pay a 2 R and a G, so 4 mana, discard this to destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. You shuffle this thing into your library from your graveyard, and then you draw a card. So that's a little bit of a callback to Yadaro, the fact that it cycles and goes into your deck, and also a callback to Kogla because it does a little bit of naturalizing as well. So I specifically love the art on these two. Just smash it.
So good.
Yeah.
And I think this is the best design in terms of organically weaving the two previous designs into a design that is its own thing, but is also an homage to the old designs, and also feels very appropriate for a red-green card no matter what. Hard to get all of that right. The enters the battlefield, choose 1. Really nice spread of, are you doing nothing? Haste and trample. Are you doing something? Now we fight and interact.
Yep.
I also really appreciate the fact that the naturalize effect, it's not mana efficient. It's a little bit clunky and cumbersome. Certainly strong option to have. It is a 2-for-1 or whatever. But I think for these two characters in particular, they should be erring on the side of big, cumbersome, and splashy instead of really mana efficient.
Okay.
So I appreciate doing that, even though it's a little unwieldy, because I think that's just the right thing to do for this set of characters.
So for this particular card, do you remember the video game Rampage?
Yeah.
Beating down buildings with, I think the characters were like an ape, a dinosaur, and a rat.
I don't remember that well, but I think I remember the ape.
Yeah. And then The Rock decided to make a movie out of this for who knows what reason, and it's very corny and kind of watchable, I guess.
I'm guessing he received a lot of money.
That's definitely true. I've got some real Rampage vibes with these two, just smashing things.
Yeah.
So I really like the flavor of this card, and I do think this is a pretty good card. And as I mentioned, it's going to show up on my list a little bit later. For now, on my list, let's see, I'm going to number 3 on mine. I believe this is pronounced Jeru and Hazaret. I think the D is silent, so if I'm right, great. If I'm wrong, I do apologize. 2 RR and a dub. So this is a 5 mana, 5/4 legendary human god. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, Jeru and Hazaret has vigilance and haste, so that's a little bit of a callback to Hazaret and being able to attack with it. Whenever Jeru and Hazaret attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may exile a legendary creature card from among them. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Until end of turn, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. All right, so look at this card. My first thought is, great, 5 mana, 5/4, plays like Hazaret. Want to get cards out of my hand, vigilance and haste. It's not indestructible like Hazaret was, which does make some sense. And then when I attack with this, I get my attack trigger, take a look at the top 6 cards, find a legendary, ideally casting it for free, with the hope and probably the idea of I'm putting a lot of legendary creatures into my deck to be able to satisfy this clause. That's about it.
And it's cool that they're like the payoff at the end of it speaks to, you want to be playing with expensive cards, high mana cost cards, but the first line is like, get your hand empty.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a threading the needle of you do want to be mana efficient, but you also want to make sure you have some big hits in your deck.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of stuff that sort of is, you kind of want to do a mix of both of the things.
Pulls you in both directions,
right?
Which I think is a really good thing. This could be the top end for some sort of Boros-based strategy. Don't really know what it looks like. Maybe mid-range, maybe pure aggro. Again, not sure. But it does look like there's some power level baked into this thing, and I'm actually pretty glad it's not indestructible.
Yeah.
I think that would be kind of lame.
Yeah, just let people kill the haste, vigilance, sneak and show thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't know.
I am going to... This looks like your runner-up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very simple, but Marshal of Zalfir.
A white and a blue. So 2 mana, 2/2, human knight. Other knights you control get +1/+1, and then you can pay a white and a blue and tap this to tap another target creature. I don't know about you. I'm getting a little bit of Whipquarter vibes here.
Definitely.
Okay.
I think it makes a lot of sense for a Knight Lord. It makes a lot of sense for a blue-white design. And I really appreciate trying to give creature-type focus decks, particularly on the Lords, give them something that speaks to interaction. Not everything needs to be +1/+1 and flying, +1/+1 and island walk.
Yep. Just
all evasion, all stats, etc., etc. This has a little bit of that, certainly. It is giving everything else +1/+1, but a lot of what you're getting here is interaction. And there's enough right here that you could plausibly consider playing in a deck that isn't 100% Knights, which is another thing that a lot of the creature type matter enablers struggle with. It's kind of an all or nothing thing. You're getting enough right here on the 2/2 for 2 with a tap effect that you could play it with like some knights maybe, which I like.
What I like about this card, outside of everything you mentioned, is I like when the knight in question, or the lord, has another ability.
Yeah, me too.
Right, that gives it something to do, because most of the time the lord doesn't want to get in combat, so more often than not, just kind of acts as an enchantment. This actually has a good ability for an aggressive strategy, which is like tap your biggest creature, attack my other creatures.
Yep.
I really like that a lot. And as you mentioned, it does make sense to have this kind of ability when you are blue-based. There's blue in the puzzle there. So I like this card a ton. We'll see if knights do get any better or not. For me, my runner-up card, it's not a knight at all. Mm-hmm. It's a human, it's a frog, and it's a horror. It's Thalia and the Gitrog monster. This thing costs 1, a white, a black, and a green. So got some Abzan Siege Rhino casting cost there for a 4/4 that's got first strike and death touch, always a lethal combination. You generally only find that on Glissas, but you find it here as well. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, all right? Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, so that's kind of your Thalia aspect of things. And then when Thalia and the Gitrog monster attacks, sacrifice a creature or a land, then draw a card. For me, this card's really, really powerful, right? Yes. It reads powerful. It's card drawing in this color combination. It's a thing that you cannot block effectively. The fact that you can play multiple lands a turn is pretty nice. And the fact that it also slows down your opponent gives you the real Thalia vibes as well. It being legendary is pretty obvious, so how many copies you play is kind of negotiable, but it's big. It has a lot of text. All the text appears to be pretty good. And spoiler, this is your number 1 card for favorite design.
I think this one is great. How do you take a black-green card and a white card, mash them together and make them feel like an Abzan card? Then also, how do you take the Gitrog monster? How do you take Thalia, combine them in a way that speaks to both of them, but also feels like its own design?
Mm-hmm.
And this one is, yeah, there's some lines of text for sure, but this is a lot easier to digest than most of the designs of the, A and B together.
Yep.
I think this is the best execution of this design in the entire set. Okay. Really hard to nail everything all at the same time, of homage without feeling super derivative, of making sense for the actual color combination in question, but also if you pull apart to the original pieces, it makes sense again that way too. Part of the reason there isn't a lot of that going on in the set, in my opinion, is like it's really hard to do. I'm not trivializing that task.
I agree,
but this is a masterpiece. This is great.
And this is, we haven't really called out rarities in this set or anything. This is mythic rare that feels like a mythic rare.
Totally.
I agree. And I think this card's going to be really good, assuming that Abzan is a deck, and maybe this makes Abzan into a deck. Who knows in various formats, but this thing's really, really powerful. And it reads powerful. But there are also going to be formats where it's just like, okay, 4-mana 4/4 doesn't really do anything because it doesn't have enters the battlefield trigger, which is also fine. Now, for me, number 1 on my list, because that was number 1 on yours, it's the Ape Dinosaur Turtle.
Yeah.
We've already gone over it. 2RR GG 7/7 ETB. Gains trample and haste until end of turn, or it fights target creature you don't control. And then, of course, the cycling naturalize lets you draw a card. We already talked about the design aspect of this, and I love the design aspect of this. This card just feels powerful.
Yes.
I'm not positive if it is, and maybe Thalia and the Gitrog monster should be on the top of my list, but when I read this card and read it back a couple of times, the things that stood out to me were, okay, the creature types don't really matter. Of the 3, Ape, Dinosaur, Turtle, Dinosaur is going to be the most relevant because I believe we're revisiting Ixalan very soon. Okay, but 6 mana, when you're playing green, you can accelerate to it, enters the battlefield, almost certainly wins the fight.
Yeah.
Or it's hitting you in the face for 7, you're not going to be able to block in a meaningful way because it's large. And then the naturalized effect, as you said, it is overcosted, but it should be because the card does shuffle back into your library for you to draw it again later, and it also draws a card.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a nice option to have on a card that you could just play for the top half in some circumstances anyway.
Yeah. Now, do I think this is a format definer? I don't. I think it's more likely that Thalia and the Gitrog monster are more format defining than this card is, but the power level on this card does feel very high to me. And if I'm being honest, I don't know, I think the card's really cool, so it won out.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and sometimes cool cards just went out in the end, and that's what Kogla and Yadaro did do. That's our multicolored cards. That's the end of the Presleevables March of the Machine. So before we go and we do our like and subscribe and all that jazz, Scale of 1 to 10, how you feeling about this set now that we've kind of gone through it?
I think probably an 8.
Okay.
There's elements of it that are a little bit kind of cumbersome by design, and I spoke about that a lot with regards to the Legends, but there's a lot of cards in here that are just look really fun, and I think the way that backup and incubator spiderweb across the counter stuff is really well designed. Looks like there's a lot of ways to sort of mix and match the stuff that's going on for sealed and for draft. I love Convoke.
Yep.
I think a lot of the Convoke designs in the set that are new are particularly novel and play well for Convoke designs, particularly a lot of the reactive cards. And yeah, I mean, like I said, a little cumbersome in some spots, but very thoughtfully crafted architecture by the looks of things, and a lot of just fun, novel, whimsical designs.
Couple of things for me. I'm giving this initial grade. Obviously, no games have been played. Giving this a 9.
Cool.
Couple of reasons why. One, they're introducing a new card type, which is hard in battle. No idea how it's going to play. Looks pretty cool. It's a novel idea. It's always a risk introducing a new card type. They're going for it. And they're not going for it with like, here's 3 of them.
It's a whole set.
There's like a ton of them, right?
Yeah.
So they're taking a huge swing there, and it looks like it's going to be pretty fun. So that's number 1. Number 2, I think backup rules. I think it's a really cool ability. I think it plays really well. I think it's also worth mentioning that a lot of the cards that you focused on over the course of this 7-day series had backup.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's a great keyword.
Yeah, so I think that's really cool, and I don't know if it's going to become evergreen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. The return of Convoke, always welcome. They didn't do too much of it, but they did enough of it for it to matter, so I'm glad that it's back. I like the flavor of what's going on here, just the story they're trying to tell. You said multiple times you like the story that they're telling on some of the cards. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I really do, I guess I'll say I'm really interested to see how Incubate plays.
Sure.
Because it could be a total miss. I don't think it's going to be, but I'm very interested to see how it's going to play. You toss in the fact that they've got these saga cards on Elish Norn, like these cards that transform into sagas, which then transform back into those legendary creatures, which is really cool. They're dabbling a little bit there. And the biggest thing for me in this set, by far, is I didn't feel the need to do a rare land cycle.
Yes.
Okay, because I haven't worked there. You obviously did. It feels like every set they feel the need to either reprint a rare land cycle or make a new one. And I like that someone showed some restraint, which is just like, we have a lot going on in this set. We don't need rare lands.
Well, I think that the fetishization of the rare land stuff harkens back to a different time.
Okay.
Pre-mythic rarity, pre-arena, obviously, where those were kind of the drivers for sales. It was well established that if you came up with a cycle of dual lands, competitive players were going to need a bunch of copies, and that was a way to make sure that even if your high-rated cards, your Angels and Dragons didn't land the right way, that there was something to sort of grease the wheels. And that reality doesn't exist anymore. Those cards very rarely go for very much on the secondary market. Rares in general just don't. So once you're at the spot where there's no longer this like biz dev incentive to do it, you can just say, do we have something that's really evocative? Do we have something that we really want for standard? Is there some justification or cause to do this particular thing instead of we have to start from what the cycle of lands are and go from there, which has been the way Magic's operated for, I mean, close to maybe 20 years now. All the sets that I played with were kind of oriented around that thing. It was really rare. I can remember, like Kamigawa not having rare dual lands.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They had the legendary land, but it was really rare. For the most part, there was something there. And I can appreciate saying, we've got enough going on. The world doesn't really speak to this sort of thing. And these don't drive sales or second market liquidity in the way that they used to. So why don't we just take a set off? Yeah.
And I love that they made that decision. I don't know whose call it was. Maybe it was multiple people. I don't know. But I love that it's not here. It's not overshadowing anything, because she mentioned a lot of the time when a new set comes out, a lot of the places that people gravitate towards are, what are the lands? This time, there aren't any to get excited about, but there are plenty of other cards to get excited about. And we went over quite a few of them throughout this series. Like and subscribe time, my friends. If you like what we just did here, or you enjoy the Presleevables, feel free to drop a like any which way. You can also subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, as they say, so we can become more friendly with the YouTube algorithm. given the list that we just made here for this particular episode of Multicolor cards, tell us if you liked them in the comments. Tell them if you didn't. Tell us if you think some other card is going to be the best card or best design card in Constructed or from the design aspect of things, and we will see those comments and respond in kind. And of course, if you're not already and you'd like to be, you can become a member of our Patreon over at patreon.com/theresleevables, in which you will get episodes of the Presleevables ahead of schedule before everybody else gets it on this here YouTube page. You'll get access to some cool swag like stickers and play mats and signed basic lands from Patrick and I. And you get access to our Patreon only podcast, Unsleeved, where we talk about a ton of different things, but most importantly, we take your questions about quite literally anything.
You're curious about the bottom 5 designs in each color? That's where you want to go.
That's very, very true. And he will happily answer those questions, I'm sure. This was our first foray into doing a set design, so we'd love to know, or excuse me, a set review. So we'd love to know what you guys thought about that. Again, the comments, you can message us or, tweet at us, whatever, at Cedric A. Phillips, at Basic Mountain. Just decided to try to do something new.
Yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah.
I had a good time doing this.
Yeah, and I did too. And, if this goes over well, perhaps we'll do it for the next set and the next set after that. And then we can, 5 years from now, view this, what we just made here on the Presleevables. And then when we go over the Presleevables of March of the Machine, see what we got right and what we got wrong. But that is for another time, way into the future. He's Patrick Sullivan. I'm Cedric Phillips. Thank you very much for watching our episodes of the Presleevables March of the Machine edition. New episodes of the Presleevables coming out soon.